Mark 12, Testing the True Lamb. The hum of the church's commercial HVAC system blanketed room 204 in a steady, insulating drone, matching the low murmur of 30 adults finding their seats around laminate tables. It was 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the journey through the canon course had narrowed down to the final week of the Master's public ministry. Up at the front whiteboard, Ethan capped a black marker, having sketched a rough layout of the Second Temple's Court of the Women, complete with the 13 trumpet-shaped collection funnels of the treasury. Beside him, Claire adjusted her tablet, watching the latecomers scramble for the remaining cardboard coffee cups before opening her leather Bible. "All right, let's bring it in," Ethan said, his voice instantly grounding the room's scattered energy. "Last week we watched the dramatic entry into Jerusalem and the clearing of the temple courts. Tonight we hit Mark chapter 12, and I want to warn you up front. The atmosphere in the text has turned lethal. We aren't in the gentle hills of Galilee anymore. Jesus is standing inside the temple precinct during Passion Week, undergoing what Exodus 12 calls the examination of the Lamb. For 3 straight days, every corrupt socio-religious faction of the old establishment forms a gauntlet to systematically test him, looking for a single theological spot or political blemish that will justify his execution." Claire leaned against the podium, her eyes scanning the tables of new converts. "And because we are human, our natural instinct when we read these debates is to treat them like a spectator sport. We watch the Pharisees try to trap him with a coin, or the Sadducees mock him with an absurd riddle about a woman who marries 7 consecutive brothers, and we think, wow, Jesus really won that argument. But if you look past the surface, you realize Jesus isn't just winning debates to defend himself. He is using their own traps to perform open-heart surgery on the onlookers. He is shifting the boundary lines of what God actually requires from us." Owen, sitting toward the middle row with a yellow highlighter poised over his wide-margin Bible, frowned slightly as he compared the cross-references. "Ethan, looking at this tax trap in verse 14, it feels like a lose-lose situation for anyone. The Pharisees and Herodians ask him straight out if it's legal to pay taxes to Caesar. If he says yes, the crowds riot because they hate Rome. If he says no, the Roman guards arrest him for treason. How does looking at a silver coin fix that boundary?" "Because of what is stamped into the metal, Owen," Ethan explained, pointing to his sketch on the board. "When Jesus asks for a denarius, he forces his critics to physically pull out the currency of the occupying empire from their own pockets inside the Holy Temple. He points to the profile of Tiberius Caesar and asks whose image and inscription are on it. They have to admit it's Caesar's. Jesus' response is a masterpiece of structural engineering. Give back to Caesar what belongs to him, and give to God what belongs to God. He's telling them that the state can have its cheap silver back because it carries the emperor's mark. But you carry the unalterable inscription of the Creator. Give the coin to Rome, but give your absolute allegiance to the one who designed your soul." Gavin tapped his knuckles against his tablet screen, his brows knit in a classic binary tech support puzzle. "That makes sense for the coin, but what about the Sadducees' marriage question right after it? 7 brothers all marrying the same woman because of ancient Levirate law obligations, and then they all die. They ask him whose wife she'll be in the resurrection just to make the whole idea of an afterlife look ridiculous. It feels like a weird, hyper-legalistic joke." "It was a joke to them, Gavin," Claire intervened, her counselor's voice softening the academic friction. "The Sadducees were the wealthy, rationalist elite who didn't believe in the supernatural or the resurrection because it didn't fit inside their neat, comfortable, materialistic categories. They built that absurd hypothetical to mock people's hope. Look at how Jesus responds in verse 24. He flatly tells them they are completely wrong because they know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. He pulls them back to the burning bush narrative from the Mosaic texts, the very books they claim to protect, and highlights that God said, "I am," the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not "I was." He is the sovereign of the living, not the dead. He's telling the Sadducees that their small transactional logic can't dictate the mechanics of eternity. Jillian shifted in her padded chair, her notebook filled with meticulous financial calculations for her boutique's upcoming lease renewal. When we read the end of the chapter, where Jesus warns the crowd about the scribes who walk around in long robes and devour widows' houses under the guise of long prayers, it makes the whole institutional system look predatory. But then he points out the destitute widow dropping her last 2 copper coins into the treasury funnel. Honestly, as a business owner, watching her give away her last cent makes me incredibly anxious. Why does Jesus praise her for financial suicide while the rich guys are throwing in massive sums? "Because of the metric of the deficit, Jillian," Claire said, walking down the center aisle to ground the observation. "The text explicitly notes that the wealthy contributors were making large financial deposits out of their surplus. They gave what they would never miss. Their lifestyle, their security, and their self-reliance remained completely unblemished by their generosity. But that anonymous widow? She sneaks past the ostentatious elite and drops in 2 lepta, which equals a fraction of a single penny. Jesus calls the disciples over because her micro-donation completely shattered the treasury's scaling metrics. The rich gave a tip, but she gave her entire livelihood, her bios. She refused to let her scarcity buy her an excuse to hold back from God. Gavin leaned back, crossing his arms with a defensive sigh. Yeah, but let's be real here. If I won the lottery tomorrow, or if my startup finally got valued at a few $1,000,000, I would write a massive check to the church's outreach program instantly. It's easy to say we should give everything when we're talking about 2 cents. If I was greatly blessed with a huge surplus, doing something big for the kingdom would be a no-brainer. Ethan let the words settle for a moment, then set his marker down with a measured click. Heads turned toward him, the room quietly expectant. That is the ultimate illusion of conditional faithfulness, Gavin, and it's the exact mindset Jesus is unmasking at those treasury funnels. We live in this perpetual fantasy world where we promise ourselves we'll develop character after our circumstances change. We tell ourselves if I had $1,000,000 I'd be generous, or if I had more time, I'd serve. But the structural reality of human behavior is absolute. If you are not faithful with a penny, you won't be faithful with a dollar. The widow didn't become a sacrificial, surrendered person the morning she found herself destitute. She practiced that absolute reliance on God when she had a dollar, so that when she was reduced to a penny, her default setting didn't waver. Faithfulness isn't a luxury item you buy in the abundance of the future. It's a habit you forge in the scarcity of the present. Jillian looked down at her open Bible, her finger tracing the word livelihood in the margin of verse 44 as a quiet, heavy realization settled over her table. So Jesus isn't auditing our bank accounts, she murmured, her voice carrying a raw, unvarnished vulnerability. He's auditing our security systems. He's asking us what we are holding back to protect our own sovereignty. Exactly, Jessica, Claire said, nodding toward Jillian with an authentic, rounded warmth. The scribes used long prayers to protect their social prestige, the Sadducees used cynical riddles to protect their intellectual comfort, and the wealthy donors used their surplus to protect their financial independence. Every single one of them was using a sophisticated religious formula as a smokescreen for predetermined self-preservation. But that widow stood there entirely exposed, holding nothing back for a rainy day. She gave God what Caesar's mint could never stamp, her absolute, undefended trust. Let's take a collective breath right there, look at the dual mandate in verse 30, and talk about what it actually looks like to love him with our comprehensive internal capacity.